A very good evening and a very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, once again to a Living Inspired series. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Rav Blachman, a teacher, a Rebbe, a friend, an individual who inspires me so much. On a personal level, as I've said in the past, and I'll say it once again, someone who has impacted on me greatly, and as such has impacted on our community directly and in a very profound form and fashion. And as such, it is with humility that I welcome him this evening once again. Without further ado, Rav Blachman.
Okay. Good evening, good evening. It's Erev Shavuot, and I guess the time is to talk a bit about Shavuot and Matan Torah, how it's relevant, how should we celebrate it, what is there to celebrate? Well, before I start, I really want to thank, before I do anything, I'd like to thank Rabbi Zilberg of the Base. It's always a pleasure teaching for you, Rabbi Aaron, for the Base. I do feel like an honorary citizen of a member of the Base, and very much part of it, and it's when it was originally conception, etc., and following it. I also want to thank Reb Moshe for doing this unbelievable, creating this unbelievable tool of our Batzis Torah, of disseminating Torah knowledge. And how could I not acknowledge and thank the arch with Rabbi Mufsin, my dear beloved friend, who has spent all his life in doing nothing more than bringing God's word and inspiration to South Africa. It's a pleasure and an honor to partner together with such great people. Ashreichem. You're lucky that there are people like that in South Africa. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. God has given the community creative people who have the covet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on their minds and want to teach Yiddishkeit further. Ashreichem, praise to you, v'tov lachem. Okay, let's get back to the issue on hand. The Yom Tov of Shavuot, as we know, if you read the Chumash, doesn't really mention in any form or fashion the idea of Matan Torah. Not mentioned. It's called Chag HaBikurim, the holiday in which people bought the first fruit, the Shtei Alechem. We bought the first karbanas, the first meal offerings of the new harvest. And it's also called Chag HaAtzeret. Atzeret means a convocation. It means a stopping, putting things together. I would call the bookend, the end bookend. Atzeret is also the name of Shmini Atzeret. Shmini Atzeret means the 8th day, which is the Atzeret. It's the closing bookend of Sukkot. What exactly is the Atzeret of Shavuot? What are you closing? What are you doing here? Ramban already explains that the relationship between Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot is the same relationship between Shavuot and Pesach. Let me give a little bit of an insight into that, because it is very important. Now, do you realize that Shavuot is not a Jewish holiday? It's actually a celebration of Homo sapien, of the world. The service in the Mikdash, in the temple, were kabbanot, for the good of the world. We had sacrifices, 70 bulls, 77 Purim, which were there symbolically to pray for the goodwill and for the 70 nations of the world. It's a universal holiday. It's interesting to notice that in Jerusalem on Sukkot, you have people coming, non-Jews from all over, and there's like a parade on Sukkot. Of the non-Jewish people coming from all over the world, and it's actually true. Literally, ki beisi beis tefillah yikareh l'chol ha'amim. My house, my temple will be a place of worship for all the nations, is the basic idea behind Sukkot. That's the avodas hayom in the Beis Hamikdash, Shivim Purim. But then finally on the 8th day, in context that we've celebrated Homo sapien, and we've seen the greatness of this great world, which God wants it to go further and grow, Then we have one day at the end, which we celebrate our own personal relationship with God, and that's what Shmini Atzeres is. We say, now that we've celebrated the world, let's have our private little relationship with us. What's our relationship with God? That is a Jewish holiday. That's a holiday celebrating the Jewish covenantal relationship between God and Jew. That's what the pasuk says in Shir HaShirim, Hevi'ani HaMelech Hadarav, Nagila v'nismach habach. When the king brings us into his intimate chambers, then we are rejoicing with him. And that's what the Midrash says is what Shmini Atzeres is. If you look at it carefully, you've seen the great, beautiful world of the Homo sapien, that which God wants should be elevated and grow. And then we take the kernel of it all. What's it really about? It's about that relationship with the Jews, which enable this to happen. The world will not rise if the Jews will not engage, live, and nurture their covenantal relationship. So the Shmini Atzeres is actually that kernel of truth, which afterwards is the source of that big Sukkot. As usually, Sof Ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila, that which you do at the end, it was your original intention. The Atzeres, the Shmini Atzeres, that unique relationship, that covenantal relationship between the Jew and God, that intimate relationship going into his rooms and into his chambers, that empowers us and empowers the world to bring Homo sapien, all men, to the idea of God, recognition of God, acknowledgement of God. And this justifies creation, as the Ramban writes in Parshat Ba'o. He says, I really can't find any real reason for creation except for only one thing. And he says, you know what the reason of creation is? God wanted Homo sapien, man, to live and be aware and acknowledge that he is a creation of a primary source called God, and he should live all of his life acknowledging that. Acknowledge that you are the creation of a creator. To bring that God awareness, that sense that I am an expression of his wisdom and will, that's the goal of history. And it's our job to take that covenantal relationship that we have, which has empowered us to change the world. Ki beiti beit tfilah yikarei l'chol ha'amim. Yes. The goal at the end of history is not the redemption of the Jews, but redemption of the world. That's the Atzeres of Sukkot. What is the Atzeres of Pesach? So the Ramban says, again, that the days between Pesach and Shavuot are once again like a long Chol HaMoed. And the beginning is Pesach, and the Atzeres taking in the kernel of what this is really all about, of being redeemed, is what happened on Shavuot. On Shavuot, obviously there we have this idea of Matan Torah, which we're going to have to develop. That is basically the reason, the idea behind redemption. Freedom, my friends, is a tool. It's a means towards an end. What does freedom mean? Freedom to do whatever you want. Is that what we're celebrating on Pesach? You know what freedom is? A slave does not have his own capability of decision. His time belongs to his master. He's nothing more than a tool in the hands of the master. Therefore, obviously, he doesn't have all that responsibility, and he has that much independence to make a decision. You know what freedom is? A free man now has the capability of making his own decisions. His time is in his own hands to use or to waste. His life is in his own hands to decide to give it meaning and purpose, or just eat, drink, and be merry. Freedom is the tool which allows you to commit yourself totally to a meaningful life. So the goal of freedom can only be realized when we have an agenda which gives us a compass, a North Star, what we call meaning. And if Torah is supposed to be the plan, the value system, You take the information the Torah gave you and you distill it into a value system, into philosophical and ethical and moral underpinnings and laws and ideas. Then you found meaning and purpose. As the Ramban writes, our job when we learn our Torah is not just to learn laws, but to distill it into values. As I once told people, I remember before I got married, my mashgiach told me, he asked me what Masechtas I learned in the yeshiva. And whatever it is, I gave him a list. He says, if you can't pour it all into a cup of coffee that you give your wife every morning, you didn't learn a thing. God doesn't want us to be people of the book. He wants us to take the book and pour it into everyday life, translate those books into values, morals, a paradigm, how to see things, how to feel. And that's what freedom is for. So it is the Atzeres of Pesach. Now, because of that, Shavuot has a very unique characteristic, which is not found anywhere else. See, every Chag, every Yom Tov, we say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim. Sanctifies Jews, Israelites, and times. And the Gemara asks that normally the law is we do not end a blessing with two themes. And it would seem to be here, you're ending the blessing with two themes, the sanctity of Jews and the sanctity of time. And the Gemara answers, no, it's one. What takes time and transforms it into a framework which we can encounter God, which is conducive to an encounter with God? What makes the day special? A vehicle a medium through which God comes closer to you. What sanctifies time? What makes time transcendent, beyond the mundane use passage of reality? It's a point of time where it's an opening, it's a window in the sky. It's like iconic art. You have a certain period of time where there it's conducive to have a relationship with God. The Jews do that. Kedushas Yisrael creates sanctity of time, and that's why we sanctify each month. To the extent that the law is that if there would be no Jews living in Israel today at all, and there would be no community living by the Hebrew calendar, that calendar would be annulled and meaningless, and there would not be any Yomim Tovim at all anywhere in the world. That's a Rambam. Maimonides writes this in his book on mitzvos. What sanctifies time for the world, which allows you in Johannesburg to have a Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, eat matzahs on Pesach, and so on and so forth, is because Jews are living in Israel by that calendar. Our behavior, the people that live here, sanctifies the time. We who live at the hub of reality sanctify time, making it a vehicle through which all the world has time of sanctity. So the Gemara says that's why it's actually one theme and not two, the Kedusha of Yisrael, which creates the Kedusha of time. Therefore, you really need the Kiddush HaChodesh, the sanctity of Chodesh Nisan, to create a reality that on the 15th day you eat matzah. And you really need a Kiddush HaChodesh during the times of Bezdin of Tishrei, in order to have the 10th day a Kiddush of a day of fasting, and the 15th day a day of Sukkot. For without Jews sanctifying time, without them making Tishrei into Tishrei, a sanctified Tishrei, Nisan into Nisan, a sanctified Nisan, that month would not be a medium of, we will call it of encounter with God. Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim. That holds true for all the Yom Tovim except for one, and that is Shavuot. The Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Vav Amud Base 6b, that Shavuot, during the times of the temple where we didn't have a steady calendar, And the months were sanctified by the court, which represented the nation. And it depended on witnesses coming and testifying that they saw the new moon. So sometimes the month would be 29 days, and then the witnesses would come, and on the 30th day would be Rosh Chodesh. The new month would start. Sometimes the witnesses came late, only came on the 30th day. So that month now had 30 days, and the 31st day became the first day of the new month. And it really depended when the witnesses came. So the Gemara says Shavuot sometimes could be on the 5th day of Sivan, sometimes on the 6th day of Sivan, and sometimes on the 7th day of Sivan. Because it really depends. If Nisan has 30 days and Iyar has 30 days, so the 6th day of Sivan will be, the Shavuot will be on Wednesday. If Nisan has, as we have today, 30 days and Iyar, or 29 days and Iyar has 30 days, it's on the 6th day of Sivan. And if they're both 30 days, it's going to be on the 7th day of Sivan. That Gemara implies something unbelievable, that Shavuot has nothing to do with Chodesh Sivan and a specific date on the calendar. You know what makes Shavuot Shavuot? The 50 days of the Omer. 50 days counting from after the first day of Pesach, what you would call the second Seder night. We start counting, you count 49 days, and on the 50th day, that's Shavuot. It has nothing to do with Chodesh Sivan. It has nothing to do with the date of Vav Sivan, because sometimes it can be Hey Sivan and sometimes it can be Zayin Sivan. That's the halacha. And actually that will revert when Mashiach comes, and once again we stop using the calendar that we have, but we'll be using once again. The month will be decided by the Beis Din. It will be depending on the witnesses. Yes, Shavuot will sometimes be Hey Sivan, sometimes Vav Sivan, and sometimes Zayin Sivan. Shavuot has nothing to do with Chodesh Sivan. You know what makes Shavuot? Chodesh Nisan. You need to start counting with the 16th day of Nisan. That's what makes it. That you count 49 days from the 16th day of Nisan, that's Shavuot. So the Rosh Chodesh, which makes the sanctity of time of Shavuot, is Nisan. It's not Chodesh Sivan, and it's not the 6th day of Sivan. Ultimately, therefore, you've got to ask yourself a serious question. On what day of the Omer was Matan Torah? And here we have a problem. We all know that the Shulchan Aruch writes that the Shabbat before Pesach is called Shabbat HaGadol, the Great Shabbos. The reason being, many reasons. One of the reasons brought down the Shulchan Aruch and in the Meforshim there is because there was a great miracle on that day. That was the Shabbat before Pesach. It was the 10th day of Nisan, and the Jews took the sheep, which then were perceived as the deity, as the gods of the Egyptians, and they took it and they tied it on their beds, on their bedposts. And there was this whole, the Egyptians went up in uproar, and there was going to be a whole battle and war, and somehow God arranged that the Jews were not damaged. And this nest, that's why it's called Shabbat HaGadol, is the great Shabbat, because there was a great nest there. You can look in the Meforshim, the commentators on Shulchan Aruch, they bring this. It's a nice way of saying that the 10th day of Nisan was on Shabbos. Well, if the 10th day was Nisan on Shabbos, that means the Exodus was on Thursday. Because the 10th day is Shabbos, and they left on the 15th day. It's a nice way of saying the Exodus was on Thursday. Well, that means they started counting the Omer on Friday. Well, if you count 49 days from Friday, you come to Thursday. A week is 7 days. Friday, the first weekend starts on Friday, ends on the following Thursday. 7 weeks, it's going to end on a Friday. You started counting on it. It's going to end up on a Thursday. That means that the 50th day of the Omer was Friday. That means the 51st day of the Omer, if we would count more, that would be Shabbat. And Torah was given on Shabbat. Which means to say Torah was given on Shabbat. If that's the case, it may have been the 6th day of Sivan, but it was the 51st day of the Omer. Now, this creates a major dilemma. I have no problem of commemorating the Matan Torah on the 6th day of Sivan, but that has nothing inherently to do with Shavuot. Shavuot has nothing to do with the 6th day of Sivan. Shavuot can be the 5th day of Sivan, can be the 7th day of Sivan. Shavuot is defined by the 50th day of the Sphira. After 49 days, the 50th day is Shavuot, as we mentioned. And that will go back to the way it was originally as soon as Mashiach comes. That was that way all the way till the 6th generation of Amoraim. So how can anybody say that Shavuot is the day of Matan Torah? Matan Torah was on Shabbos. That was the 51st day of Sivan, of the Omer. Granted, it was the 6th day of Sivan, but Shavuot has nothing to do with the 6th day of Sivan. How do we call it Yom Matan Torah? What are we doing here? Why are we spending a night full of shiurim? I remember I once came into South Africa. I remember Rabbi Mufson, and she brought me in. I remember a whole night of shiurim. Now, why are you doing this? You got the wrong night. Yom Tov Sheni is the 51st day. That night you should be up all night. If there's any justification to say Yom Matan Torah, it should be on the 2nd day of Yom Tov, but not on the 1st. But it's not that way. What do we celebrate? And we do say Yom Matan Torah Teinu. I want to tell you how far that goes. You know, what's the primary source that this is the Yom Matan Torah? It's not biblical. It's actually Talmudic in the Tanakh period. There's a very interesting discussion in the Gemara. What is the character of a Jewish holiday? There are 2 psukim in the scriptures. One says, a convocation for God, Atzeret LaHashem Elokecha. The other says, a convocation for you, Atzeret Lachem. So Rabbi Eliezer says, listen, there's 2 ways of celebrating the holiday. Either you sit all day and learn and daven, and eating is optional. Or you can even spend the whole day eating and drinking and being merry. We don't paskin that way. We paskin halacha like Rabbi Yeshua that you have to cut the day in half, literally in half, and half the day should be for learning and Torah, and the other half should be for enjoying, eating, drinking, relaxing, etc. Rambam specifically describes that one should stay in learning, etc., from early morning and until Mincha Gedola, and only then go to his big meal. I think that's the reason why we schlep the davening out on Yom Tov to keep people in shul much more, in order they should be more oisik in La Hashem on Yom Tov. That's why they probably have yotzros and big speeches. No, you know the rabbis, they try to get you to do the right thing and they don't tell you what they're doing. So this is probably what's happening. So the Gemara there said that Rebbe Lazar said that even if Rebbe Eliezer believes that you really don't have to party, you can sit and learn and daven all day. It's true for Pesach and it's true for Sukkot, but not for Shavuos. Because Shavuos is the day that we receive the Torah. And therefore, obviously, you have to party, which is really interesting. It's because it's the day we receive the Torah, so the character of the day is Matan Torah, and therefore you have to express that character by translating your values into eating and drinking and not just looking into the books. I told you, pouring it all into the cup of coffee. Es via mensch, trink via mensch. That's how you're supposed to celebrate Shavuot. Learn, but then translate that in what you do. But what do we see? That the character of the day is Matan Torah. But how could it be? Matan Torah was on the 51st day of the Omer. The day is on the 50th day of the Omer. What are we doing here? That's question number 1. And there's something else which nagged me for years. Let's be very honest. What happened on Shavuot? So to speak, there was a Matan Torah, and then Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days. By the 39th day, we already two-timed God by having a relationship with a golden calf. You understand, the chassan went around for a walk, was about to come back. By the 39 days after the chassan, Epis the Kala found a boyfriend. Well, the chassan comes down from the mountain and sees the Kala dancing with the boyfriend, equal to Hekel Azov. He breaks the marriage contract and breaks the tablets. So what exactly did you receive? Why are you spending night learning on Shavuot? Are you funny? You didn't get anything there. It took a long time. It was only Yom Kippur following that Moses finally received the second tablets and did come down the day after Yom Kippur. And that's when we got that bookshelf over here. We should be staying up at night, till Nidra night, and learning and having shiurim. At Shavuos, what are you celebrating? A marriage which wasn't consummated? What are we doing here? Why are we wasting our time? It didn't work. The Gemara actually calls Yom Kippur the day of our wedding. The Mishnah says in Tainus that the Yom Kippur was a great day of being honest with yourself, and therefore was a great day for finding a spouse. I love this. The idea you should only engage in finding a spouse when you and she will be totally honest with themselves. And that's Yom Kippur. We've done introspection. Now I know who I am, not who I want to be, not who I projected image. Who am I? A great day for finding a spouse. And the Gemara says that that's the pasuk of Yom Chatunato, Yom Simchat Libo, the day of God's marriage, the day of his happiness, is Yom Kippur, because that's the day of the receiving the second tablets. Don't you understand? On Shavuos, all we got, whatever we got was broken. Whatever you received was broken on the 17th day of Tammuz. 17th day of Tammuz. 40 days after Matan Torah, when Moses came down, he smashed those tablets. What we have left of Shavuot are broken tablets. What's the idea? Shavuot, at the best, you receive broken tablets. What are you celebrating with broken tablets? No, the tablets are called the tablets of the covenant. Does it mean that God broke his covenant and we had a new covenant? So why would anybody want to celebrate something that didn't happen and didn't work? What's the meaning of this holiday? You know, the Gemara says in Brachot that when you see a Talmud Chacham, a sage that spent time thinking and learning, but you know, with age, the brain gets a little weaker and sometimes people forget their learning. You should be very, 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 honor him immensely. So Ken Sheshachach Talmudo, you should definitely honor him. And the Gemara says because the broken tablets were in the ark together with the second tablets. If God honored the broken tablets, then we have to honor a Jew which no more can tell his wisdom because his brain doesn't work anymore. So Ken Shechach Talmudo. You know, that's a big Gemara basically telling me whatever we received, whatever wisdom we received on Matan Torah, it was broken. We were a Zaken Sheshachach Talmudo. And yet we have to honor that. We had a certain status there because somehow there was a remnant that had to be honored. I want to understand, what is it in a Zaken Sheshachach Talmudo? And that the honor that we honor him is the equivalent of the Jews at Shavuos, is a day of broken tablets, and yet we honor and commemorate it. I have to tell you a story. You know, I, as a young boy, learned in a very quite acclaimed yeshiva called Yeshivat Hebron. the Rosh Yeshiva was a very, very profound person called Rav Yecheskel Sarna. In his day, he was brilliant, creative, unbelievable, well, broad scope, deep thinker. I really came at the when he was getting weaker. He had terrible diabetes and it affected multiple parts of his body. And ultimately, he really could not always control his ideas. It was very hard for him. He was a sakein sheshachach talmudo. But you know what? You may not have heard clear ideas every so often. In other words, the letters of Torah, the expression of that wisdom did not always come out right. But you saw what Torah did to that person, how it became internalized in his subconscious, and how he talked and how he walked. And I'll never forget one story that I was there, B'Shas Ma'aseh, at the time. Rabbi Cheskel Zechon Levracha, you know, sometimes he was so sick, his feet were swollen up like footballs. He couldn't walk. And sometimes he just couldn't go up the 2 stories from his house to the yeshiva. And there was a Friday night, which he didn't come. And then suddenly I see him trudging up the stairs towards the end of Ma'ariv. So one of the older boys asked him, Rosh Yeshiva, why are you coming now? Ma'ariv is over. He looked at him and he said, you must remember, davening Ma'ariv and Shavuot Minyan is a rabbinical obligation. Saying good Shabbos to the Bachurim is a biblical obligation of love your neighbor as yourself. That's a person who his value system becomes part and parcel of who he is. He doesn't have to think about it. He thinks in a certain way, something, a value system has been in there, and he just naturally reacts that way. Tefillah b'tzibur is a derabanan, zogin good Shabbos is a deraisa. Good thing to know. That was a zaken sheshachach talmudo. He may not have the tools of expressing, but the core relationship between him and Torah has gone so deep. That's who he is, and that doesn't leave you. This Gemara in Brachos is telling you that something happened at Matan Torah, that you can break the luchas from today to tomorrow. You don't have any information, but there's something happened there which will never leave us. We say that every year in the Dayenu. We say, Ilu Kirvanu Lifnei Har Sinai, if God would have brought us to Sinai and he wouldn't have given us the Torah. Dayenu, what, we would have been looking at the mountain gazing? There must have been something there prior to the giving of the Torah, which was worth being there. And what was that? Well, here the thing goes like this. This question about the 51st day is asked by a major Kabbalist called Rav Menachem Azaria of Fano. He was a professor of medicine in the University of Padua. Should you by the chance be in Padua, in the university, they still have on the wall a bust of him, of Menachem Ezra of Fano. He was a professor of medicine. You can actually see a nice, neatly trimmed beard over there. A major Kabbalist, one of the greatest Kabbalists we have. Sefer Pardes. And he has a book called Asara Ma'amarot, which is quoted quite often by many great scholars, which he asked this question: why are we celebrating the 50th day of the Omer if Matan Torah was on the 51st? And he says something which is really astounding. I'm going to just dilute it and distill it. You see, the Gemara says that God told Moshe, prepare the Jews today and tomorrow, and on the 3rd day I'll be here. That's what Moshe, that's the pasuk says. Moshe looked at the words of God and he did like a typical yeshiva bacher. What did he mean? And he made a drasha. He says, God says today and tomorrow on the 3rd day. What you really mean today is like tomorrow. They both have to be full 24-hour periods, equals 3 days. But Yom HaShlishi doesn't mean he'll come up on the 3rd day. After the 3rd day, he'll show up on the 4th. the Gemara says. So basically, the Ramah panel says God actually told him I'm planning to come on the 50th day of the Homer. But Moshe Rabbeinu made a Dreya Pilpul. It says, no, actually, you meant the 51st day of the Homer. So God showed up on the 51st day of the Homer. Now, what does this mean? This sounds a bit weird, if not childish. And here there's something very important to learn. What is the relationship between the pashtus of a pasuk, simple reading of a pasuk, and the drush of halacha? The Gaon of Vilna has a great book on Chumash called Aderet Eliyahu. And in Parshat Mishpatim, he really is a long dissertation on the relationship between pshat, simple reading, and drush. I mean the drush of halacha, the drushes of the Gemara. He says, don't think for 1 minute that every drush is the pshat. There are schools of thought like that. Malbim, Ktava, Kabbalah. They somehow think that every drush is pshat. He said, that's terribly wrong. Drush is drush and pshat is pshat. Their relationship is as follows. I'll give you an example. The pasuk says, if you damage a person and pluck out his eye, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? That's what the pasuk says. Yet somehow Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral tradition, taught us that we should interpret that as not eye for an eye, but the value of an eye for an eye. Gra says, I want you to understand. The truth is it's an eye for an eye. That's the emes of Torah. But practically how we apply it, we substitute an eye by giving money of an eye. You're redeeming your eye by giving money for an eye. But the truth is the pshuta shel mikra, the practical application of it, that's what we're taught in drush. That's what we're taught in the Gemara. The Torah says that a certain slave is a slave forever. The pasuk says, and the Gemara says, no, it means till the Jubilee year. So you know what it means? You are a slave forever. But if the Jubilee year comes around, it uproots the ownership. There are many, many examples like this across the board. The truth of God lies in Pshuto Shel Mikra, in the simple way of reading it. What God wrote is what he meant, but it didn't mean it to be applied that way. And the Drash will teach us how to apply those values. You know, God said, I want to come on the 50th day of the Omer. And Moshe says, right, the reason of you being with us is the 50th day of the Omer. But practically, we can't apply it until the 51st. And let me explain very, very deeply what I mean. You know, we try to teach our children values. We're educators. Parents are educators. As a teacher, definitely so. And long ago, I've learned that in order to teach values, you have to tell stories or broad laws, whatever it be. But the truth of the matter is these are all metaphors which have to be distilled. Ultimately, you're left with the value. You know, as a child, I was taught Aesop's fables, Grimm's fairy tales, Mother Goose stories. I know Heidi, whatever it only be. What were my parents doing? They were trying to instill culture and values. I didn't realize at the time. And if they would have said overtly, here, there's a value, it wouldn't have happened. They told me stories. And subconsciously, those values came in. After a while, I've forgotten the stories. But I wake up in the morning and those values are there. You know, it's like people get married. There's a reason behind it. Of a certain unique feeling of belonging to each other, almost an unquenchable desire for constant proximity. But it's expressed practically through a lot of things. Like people ask me, what is marriage? You think marriage is just love? No, it's also very practical. You got to wash the dishes, you got to pay the bills, whatever you have to do, you have to do. On your anniversary, you will buy flowers, you will take her out to dinner, you will buy pearls, diamonds, whatever people do. But those are only external expressions of a core truth, and that is why I'm celebrating the reason of my marriage. I'm reconnecting to the primary reason of my marriage. All the rest is an expression of it, an extension of it. You see, God gave the Torah. What does it mean? The first word of the Decalogue is Anochi, Aleph, Nun, Chaf, Yud. The Gemara says in Masechet Shabbat, page, I think it's 112b, Anochi is an acronym. Anochi, the Aleph means Ano, I. The Nun means Nafshi, myself. The Chaf of Anochi means Katav, I wrote myself. The Yud means Yahiv, and I gave myself to you. God gave himself to us in book form. Find the author in the book. Find the composer in the music. Find the artist in the painting. Find the sculptor in the sculpture. He gave himself to you. Find me there. I've given myself to you in book form. I've given you my identity, my feelings, my values. It looks like a big book of laws. Well, will you distill those laws and look for their philosophical underpinnings and their ethical and moral rules? And you will have me there. God wants a covenantal relationship with the Jews by giving himself to them. Torah, the luchos are not just tablets, they're a covenantal tablets of a covenant. They're called luchot edut. It's a covenantal relationship. God wants to give himself to you in a covenantal relationship. And the Torah is basically a way of him giving himself to you. You're supposed to actually take that within that context and find him in that book. So don't you understand that on the 50th day of Nisan, God says, I'm giving myself to you. But Moshe said the Jews don't have the tools yet to understand that, to see that. They need another day to be able to take in the information. Moshe Osif Yom Echad Midaitoi. God is fine. He's part of the covenant. He was there on the 50th. We simply did not have the tools. We were, so to speak, young. We needed another day of perfecting our personalities. We needed a bit more. And even that at the end didn't work well. As you know, we blasted it all up and had to wait for Yom Kippur. But you know what? A covenant was given. And we accepted it. And we said, Nasev and Nishma, we were capable of saying, yes, we accept this covenant. Because we had one more day. So God's part of the covenant was on the 50th day. Our accepting the covenant was the 51st. Now, I want you to know the deepest thing. So the emes is, the conceptual truth of the Matan Torah is not the information, it's God giving himself to me on the 50th day. How that translated in reality into a book form was the 51st. And that book form was broken. And that book form had to go through transformations. A different type of a book was written. And another time for receiving the book was written. But the God giving himself never left the mountain. There was no second idea of a party over there. The Chassan has been there since the 50th day. The Kala finally showed up on Yom Kippur. Because the first time he showed up, it was bad news. What you are celebrating is not the 51st day. What you received on the 51st day, you lost. What you're celebrating is what happened on the 50th day. The emes, the pshat, God was on the mountain. You did not have the capability yet of understanding and seeing. I have given myself to you. I am celebrating that God is willing to give himself to man. And I'm hoping when it comes to Yom Kippur, I will say, God, man, God, I can now give myself to you. So I look at Shavuot as one side of the party. It's God's holiday. And I'm happy that he's giving himself to me. But it's only on Yom Kippur that I finally say, I think I can give myself to you. So when you look at the broken tablets, you're looking at the tablets as they were, which represent only one thing. What do we have of those tablets? Only that God gave himself to us. The letters of the tablets flew up to heaven. There's no information. It means that aspect of the covenant of God giving himself happened on the 50th day of Sivan. And there's no sounds and no, you know what that is? We're not celebrating the voices and the sounds of Torah. That only happened on the 51st. We're celebrating the still sounds of silence of God being there, giving himself to you. You know, in a true intimate relationship, you don't really have to talk too much, really giving oneself to another. Mamish, you don't have to talk. You just have to realize that they're there together. Actually, talking disturbs. I'd rather close my eyes and feel you around me. And that's Shavuot. That's the broken tablets. It's actually, in a way, I hate to say it, sometimes you have to break the tablets. You know, the Gemara says, it's so important to know that your relationship with your teacher will only find its true dimensions when the teacher passes on. Because while the teacher is there, somehow we connect to the externalities of the person, the externalities of the relationship. When that teacher leaves, or that spouse leaves, or that person that you're close to isn't here anymore, you don't have those externalities anymore. You start focusing totally on what that person really meant to you. At that point in time, you start learning what his pauses are, what his silences are, because you no more hear the voice. Let me tell you, I remember the year of my mourning for my father. I spent the whole year teaching every Rosh Chodesh about relationships of father and child. And I really connected in the most profoundest way to my dad, which I always did love, but in a way much deeper and much profounder than I ever experienced before. Ein divrei Torah nikvaim ad sheba'aleihem ne'asafim. Sometimes you need broken tablets to be able to hear the sounds of silence and understand how profound that relationship is. So the Rashi says at the end of the Parshas Bracha, when Moshe broke the tablets, he said, Yasher koyach sheshibarta, thank you for breaking it. And do you know something interesting? The Marshal says the different customs of a chuppah are parallel to what happened at Matan Torah. And breaking the cup, that's parallel to Shbiras Haluchos, to breaking the tablets. And we all scream, Mazel Tov! You know what you're saying? Listen, you know what a real marriage is? A marriage when sometimes the tablets are broken and sometimes the things aren't easy. And we've all been there. But then you realize the depth of the relationship and you say, yeah, then I know how much we really are important to each other, how we can't live without each other. When things are broken, Mazel Tov, you scream when the glass is broken, when the luchos are broken. And that's the Mazel Tov of Shavuos. God was there for us. He wanted to give himself to us. It took time for us to understand and try to give ourselves to him. So if you're going to be up on Shavuos, believe me, I don't know what your schedules are and what I'll tell you what I think should be done. This is not a day to focus on the information of Torah, because that information has nothing to do with Shavuos. That actually came on Yom Kippur. You want a night of Shu'urim on, Gemara and Tosfos, do it on Yom Kippur night after Kol Nidre. You know what you focus on Shavuos night? To what extent do I see God in my Torah? To what extent do I see God in my life? To what extent am I celebrating the fact that he gave himself to me and I somehow can live that way? Go back to your covenantal relationship. Go back to the core relationship between God and man. Your luchos were broken. Whatever was left was its truth. That truth of Torah, which was always there, and you are celebrating it. That is the celebration of Shavuot. That's the 50th day. The day of silence. Oh, the thunder and the lightning, that came the 51st. Didn't last. But the day of silence when God was there waiting for us, that's the day we celebrate. So I really hope you take this to heart. It's an important meditation, very important way of looking at the day. You know, there was a great famous Hasidic thinker, the Rebbe of Dinov, that he wrote, you know, the Torah and Torah scrolls. What is the letter? You have white parchment, and you blot out a certain part of it with black ink. So you think that the letter is formed by the black ink. Nah, you don't have good eyes, he says. It's the white place around it, which is the letter. You have to look for the white letters on Shavuos, not just the black letters. As I said, there's no sound deeper and more beautiful than those sounds of silence. And that's what we should be looking for on Shavuos. Have a happy Shavuos, a meaningful Shavuos. I thank you again, Rabbi Mopson, Rabbi Zilberg, and Moshe, for affording me the capability of teaching Torah. And I only hope and pray that these words will somehow find vistas into your hearts to reassess the importance of the day and to connect to it personally, because I don't think that anybody is like anybody else. I don't think you can have a relationship with God which somebody else has. It's your own. It's yours. Your Shavuos is yours. Mine is mine. Everybody's is his own. How much of God do you see in your cup of coffee? How much have you internalized his values and tried to live in his mindset? That's what this is about. Have a great Yom Tov. And again, thank you very much. Kol Tov. Bye.
Thank you to Yura Blachman for such a beautiful, beautiful insight. And just as you actually said that the stories of your parents weren't stories but taught you values, your beautiful Torah really gives us such values about how to live our lives and take out the juice of the marrow bone of Torah. I just want to thank you for that really elevation that we're going to get on our Shavuos from beautiful Torah that you've just shared with us. And just to thank you once again, not only for your Torah, but your friendship. And may you just have a beautiful Yom Tov. And thank you for inspiring our Yom Tov in sharing such beautiful, beautiful, innovative chidushim and insights. Thank you very much.